1917, a 62-year-old gunmaker in Utah received a request from General John Pershing. Pershing had been watching the Germans field armored aircraft that American machine gun rounds simply could not penetrate. He wanted something new, something bigger, a gun that could hit hard enough to tear through metal at range. John Moses Browning went back to his bench and started scaling up his own design. What came out of that work entered American military service in 1921 as the M1921. The refined M2HB, the form most soldiers know, followed in 1933 and has remained in service ever since. It flew in the nose of P-51 Mustangs over Nazi Germany. It sat on the deck rails of ships at Leyte Gulf. It rode on the roof of Humvees through Fallujah. Right now, in 2026, it is mounted on the M1 Abrams, on American naval vessels, on vehicle gun trucks, and in modified form on U.S. military helicopters. It still appears across American combat and security platforms around the world. The United States Army tried to replace it twice in the last 20 years. Both programs were canceled. Both times, the money was redirected back to upgrade the original. More than 100 years after it entered service, the M2 Browning is not a legacy system being kept alive by bureaucratic inertia. It is still in active production. It is still being ordered in new quantities, and when you understand what Carlos Hathcock did with one in Vietnam and what that moment revealed about this weapon that no procurement program has ever managed to design away, you begin to understand why John Browning's 1917 drawing is still alive on the factory floor. To understand the M2, you have to begin not with a gun, but with a crisis. In 1917, the Germans introduced the Junkers JI, an armored ground attack aircraft with a steel shell around the cockpit and engine that made it effectively immune to the standard rifle-caliber machine guns American and Allied aircraft were carrying. It was one of the first moments in modern warfare when armor made a target simply unreachable by the weapons trained on it. That mattered. And the truth is, it was a warning of the century to come. General Pershing, commanding the American Expeditionary Forces in France, sent a direct requirement to the Army Ordnance Department. He wanted a machine gun capable of firing a round of at least half an inch in diameter at a muzzle velocity of no less than 2,700 feet per second. Something that could get through metal. Something that could reach out far enough to hit targets the .30-06 cartridge could not touch. The Army turned to John Browning. He was already the most prolific arms designer in American history. The 1911 pistol, the Browning automatic rifle, the M1917 machine gun, all of it bore his mark. He was 62 years old. He looked at the requirement, looked at his M1917 design, and started scaling it up. Winchester developed the cartridge alongside him. While work was underway, American forces captured several German Mauser T-Gewehr anti-tank rifles and their 13.2mm ammunition. Those German rounds hit 2,700 feet per second and could punch through 1 inch of steel plate at 250 yards. Winchester used that ammunition as the performance benchmark and engineered accordingly. The result was the 50 BMG, the 50 caliber Browning machine gun cartridge, a round so powerful and so well designed that it remains the NATO standard heavy machine gun cartridge to this day. The first prototype underwent trials on October 15, 1918. Only 3 weeks before the armistice ended the war, it had been built to fight. It was heavy. Its rate of fire was lower than Pershing wanted. Its muzzle velocity still fell short. But Browning and Winchester kept working. They did not stop because the first answer was imperfect. They kept pushing until the problem was solved. In 1921, the water-cooled M1921 entered limited service. Through the 1920s, the design continued to evolve. Then, in 1933, after Browning's death in 1926, engineer S.H. Green, solved the final problem. He created a universal receiver that could be configured into 7 different variants by swapping barrels, jackets, and feed components. That detail matters more than it sounds. Because what Green created was not just another machine gun, he created a system. A single receiver that could become an aircraft gun, an anti-aircraft weapon, a vehicle-mounted heavy machine gun, or a ground infantry weapon. The M2HB, the heavy barrel version, entered production in 1933, and the United States military has never stopped producing it since. That was the real breakthrough. The same core mechanical architecture in every M2 could be configured as a right-hand or left-hand feed, as a fixed weapon for aircraft or vehicle turrets, or as a flexible spade-grip infantry weapon. The same Browning .50 caliber design could sit in the nose of a P-51 Mustang, on a tank turret, on the deck of a Navy ship, or on an infantry heavy weapons tripod. At a time when other militaries were buying separate weapons for separate roles, the United States had one design serving all of them. And that versatility is one of the biggest reasons production never stopped. There was always another platform that needed one. There was always another role it could fill. There was always another battlefield where raw power, range, and adaptability still mattered. But the most revealing moment in the M2's story did not come in the war it was built for. It came decades later, on a hillside in Vietnam, when one Marine sniper looked at this old heavy machine gun and saw something almost no one else had seen. The moment that defines the M2 most clearly did not happen in the war it was built for. It happened 46 years later on a hillside in Vietnam, when a Marine Corps sniper decided to find out just how far he could make the gun shoot. Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock had 93 confirmed kills and an estimated 300 more. He was the most feared sniper of the Vietnam War. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces reportedly placed a $30,000 bounty on his head, far above the typical bounty of only a few hundred placed on most American snipers. He wore a white feather in his bush hat as a personal dare to anyone willing to try collecting it. Hathcock usually worked with a Winchester Model 70 in .30-06, but he ran into a problem that rifle could not solve. Targets were appearing at distances beyond the effective range of any standard sniper weapon in the American inventory. Standard sniper rifles of that era topped out at around 1,000 yards for reliable kills. Hathcock needed reach far beyond that. And this is where the story turns. Because instead of accepting the limit, he looked at the M2 Browning sitting on its tripod, the same gun that had already been in service since before he was born, and he had an idea. He asked Navy CB metalworkers to build him a mounting bracket. He fitted his 8-power Unertl scope to it. He used the traversing and elevating mechanism of the M2 tripod as a precision aiming platform, firing the weapon in single-shot mode instead of automatic. It sounds almost improvised, almost reckless, but the truth is, it revealed something extraordinary about the weapon. In 1967, from a hillside position at Hill 55 southwest of Da Nang, Hathcock put a 50 BMG round through a Viet Cong soldier at 2,460 yards, almost 1.5 miles away. It became the longest confirmed sniper kill in history, made with a machine gun that had entered service in 1933. That record stood for 35 years. Only in 2002 did Canadian snipers in Afghanistan, using purpose-built .50 caliber sniper rifles, finally break it. And that detail is the key. Those rifles, the McMillan TAC-50 and its descendants, fired the same cartridge Browning and Winchester had developed in 1917. The M2's round did not become obsolete. It became the benchmark. It became the standard against which long-range power was measured. Hathcock's shot helped prove what the 50 BMG cartridge could do at extreme range. The purpose-built long-range rifles that came after it, the McMillan TAC-50, the Barrett M82, all stood on the same foundation. What Hathcock understood, and what his improvisation exposed so clearly, was that the M2 was never truly designed for only one role. It was designed for power. Raw, overwhelming, adaptable power. And the applications were always going to be limited only by the imagination of the man behind the trigger. But that same strength also explains why replacing the M2 has been so brutally difficult. The Army tried to retire it before. The M85 coaxial machine gun, adopted in the late 1950s as a vehicle-mounted replacement for the M2 on armored vehicles, was plagued by reliability problems for 2 decades. In the end, the Army quietly reinstalled M2s in the mounts the M85 had vacated. The pattern was established early. A new program, a promising prototype, a specific improvement over the original, and then the hard reckoning with what gets lost in the trade. The first serious modern attempt came with the XM312. It emerged from the Army's Advanced Crew-Served Weapons program in the early 2000s, a combined effort to replace both the M2 and the Mark 19 grenade launcher with a single convertible weapon that could fire either 50 BMG or 25mm programmable rounds. On paper, it looked promising. It was lighter than the M2, a meaningful advantage when moving a 130-pound system in combat. But there was a cost. Its rate of fire was around 200 rounds per minute. The M2 fires at 450 to 600. That gap was not minor. It was fatal. When the Army ran operational assessments and put the question to the people who would actually use it, that rate of fire difference killed the program. In 2008, the XM312 was canceled along with the broader Future Combat Systems initiative. The Army tried again. General Dynamics developed the XM806, a more focused, lightweight replacement. It was 49% lighter than the M2, with 60% less recoil, designed specifically to solve the weight problem that had been the main complaint since the weapon first entered service. Better in nearly every ergonomic measurement. Easier to transport, easier to operate. On paper, again, it seemed like progress. But once more, the same wall appeared. Its rate of fire was only 265 rounds per minute. The M2 still ran up to 600. In July 2012, the XM806 was canceled, and the money budgeted for it was redirected back into upgrading the existing M2 fleet to the M2A1 standard. That is the part people often miss. For roughly a decade, the Army poured time, money, and effort into multiple programs trying to find something lighter. And both times, the same answer came back. You can make it lighter, yes. You can make it more ergonomic. You can make it easier to carry. But a 50 BMG weapon cannot be made dramatically lighter without sacrificing the mass and mechanical momentum that drive a high cyclic rate. And a heavy machine gun that fires slowly is not the same weapon in operational terms. Rate of fire is not just another performance metric here. It is the whole point. The M2 exists to put a sustained volume of half-inch rounds onto a target, into a vehicle, through a wall, or across the sky, into an aircraft. Cut that rate, and you have cut the weapon in half. Each time the Army tried to leave the M2 behind, it discovered the same brutal truth. There is no 40-pound version of what the M2 does. And that realization leads directly to the darker, deeper answer behind the M2's survival. Not nostalgia, not tradition, not procurement, laziness, something much harder than that. Here is what 100 years of failed replacement efforts actually reveal. The M2 Browning was designed in 1917 to solve one specific problem: put enough energy on a target to defeat armor at range. But what Browning produced to solve that problem was not merely a gun. It was a mechanical system so fundamentally matched to the physics of what it needed to do that every attempt to redesign it has smashed into the same hard limit. The 50 BMG round weighs about 700 grains. It travels at roughly 2,900 feet per second. At that mass and velocity, it carries enough energy to penetrate light armor, disable vehicle engines, bring down low-flying aircraft, and reach targets at distances smaller calibers simply cannot touch. And really, that is the heart of the matter. This is not a miracle of marketing. It is not sentimental attachment to an old weapon. It is physics. You cannot deliver that kind of energy downrange without mass and momentum behind it. And you cannot sustain that kind of rate of fire without the mechanical architecture Browning spent years refining. That is why the M2A1 of today, despite its meaningful improvements, still sits on a receiver that is functionally the same design, SH. Green finalized in the early 1930s. The M2A1 uses a quick-change barrel, a flash suppressor, and fixed headspace. These are real improvements. Important improvements. They make the weapon faster to service in the field and safer under combat conditions. But the core design remains the same, because the core problem remains the same. And the truth is, that is the real reason the M2 is still in service. Not nostalgia, not bureaucratic inertia, not the fact that tooling already exists or that replacement is expensive. It is still in service because the physics of what it does cannot simply be redesigned away. Every program that has tried to lighten it has run into the same wall. At 50 BMG, the physics of high sustained fire rate and manageable weight are genuinely incompatible. The Army learned that lesson twice in the span of a decade. Both times, the conclusion was identical: upgrade what you have. That decision produced the M2A1, which began fielding in 2011. The quick-change barrel eliminated the old timing and headspace adjustment that had to be reset every time a barrel was swapped, a process that, if done incorrectly, could cause the weapon to detonate on the very next round fired. Under the old system, barrel changes took 3 to 5 minutes and required precision tools. The M2A1 cuts that to 30 seconds. That single change, applied across roughly 45,000 weapons in the American inventory, is not cosmetic. It is a meaningful operational improvement built onto a receiver design that is nearly 90 years old, and still, the weapon keeps showing up where it matters most. The M1 Abrams carries one as its commander's weapon. American attack helicopters carry variants of it. Naval vessels use it against small boat threats. It is in Ukraine on vehicle-mounted gun trucks along the same kind of contested front lines for which Pershing first demanded it in 1917. Different armor, different aircraft, different enemy. But really, when you strip everything else away, it is the same physics and the same gun. There is a class of military technology that survives not because nobody has tried to improve it, but because every serious attempt to improve it runs into the same unforgiving limit. The M2 Browning belongs to that class. John Browning died in 1926, 5 years after the weapon that would become the M2 entered service. He did not live to see it in the nose of a Mustang, or on a Humvee in Fallujah, or modified by a Marine sniper into the most lethal long-range weapon in Vietnam. He solved the problem Pershing handed him, and then moved on. The engineers who came after him spent the next century trying to build something that could do what the M2 does with less cost, less weight, and less complexity. None of them succeeded. Every program ended with the same answer: take the money and make the original better. A weapon designed in 1917 is still being manufactured in 2026 because the problem it was designed to solve has not changed, and the physics constraining its solution have not changed. Pershing wanted something that could reach out and defeat armor at range. That requirement is just as relevant on a Ukrainian gun truck today as it was on a French hillside in 1917. Nobody has found a better answer to that question. And until someone does, if anyone ever does, the factories will keep running. If this is the kind of military history you care about, the engineering, the battlefield decisions, the reason some machines outlast everything built to replace them, then leave a comment, give the video a like, and subscribe in a natural way that keeps this conversation going.